Welcome to the Real Life Buyer podcast. In this podcast, you will hear interviews with business owners, entrepreneurs, thought leaders, authors, and technical specialists in their field. These professionals will hasten your development, accelerate your career, and broaden your business know-how. Now, introducing your host, Dave Barr, interviewing with a purchasing twist.
Hello, and welcome to the Real Life Buyer. I'm delighted to welcome my next guest, Chandler Walker. Now, Chandler graduated from the University of Nevada, Reno with a degree in biochemistry and went on to form the Stone Age Fuel School of Fitness, which is now approaching its 10th anniversary. Having been the Chief Growth Officer at Mad Lamb Business Group, Chandler now delivers his expertise at Taylor Media, or should I say Taylor Green Media. In addition, Chandler hosts his own podcast called Chan's Logic Culture of Care. But today, Chandler and I will discuss his 7 pillars of entrepreneurial wellness, that through a 12-week curriculum, he is able to transform a client both mentally and physically to achieve lasting results for their long term. Now, this program draws upon several tools, including cognitive behavior coaching through journaling, micro-habit actions, custom meal planning, and video-based workouts. So there's quite a lot to take in there. So without further ado, I welcome Chandler onto the podcast. Hi, Chandler.
Hey, good to be here. I'm excited to talk to everyone about how you can go from burnout to wellness and ultimately live your dream physically, mentally, and financially.
That's fantastic. And I think that's a dream for many. I like the mentally and I like the financially. I struggle with the physically sometimes, but there we go.
That's the hardest part.
Exactly. That takes the most commitment. Anyway, let's give some context to your history. Perhaps you can initially give a brief introduction of who is Chandler Walker and the area of expertise you've acquired before we work our way through your 7 pillars.
Yeah, for sure. Good question. So I think it all stems from when I was growing up as a kid. I grew up with a mother who suffered from bipolar disorder. And back then, 20 years ago, it was, if you said something was wrong with you mentally, people said you were stupid and just put a smile on your face and the problem doesn't exist. So I had to learn how to communicate with her from a young age, how to be neutral. So if she'd be on a high or a low, I had to learn how to be neutral so I didn't make the problem worse. And that really taught me good communication patterns for humans in general. If you remove the ego and you remove your emotion from the equation, you can have a pretty good conversation with almost anybody. But this led me to a med school track. And we didn't actually figure out that something was going on with her until my 20s because of the stigma associated with it. And so as I was going on this path, and I got my degree in biology and biochemistry, really focused on microbiology and immunology, I kind of got disenfranchised as I was starting to precept in the medical realm, because what I felt like what I was doing was we would speak to a patient and go in the back, look at the giant book, and then provide medication. And that was a real big problem. And it's not a shot at physicians. And this is a shot at the system. The system's designed to put a Band-Aid on problems, but it's not designed to really facilitate helping people. Like if I tell you to eat an apple, well, you're probably not going to do it. So I just have to give you medication over and over again. And that's really what started this journey. And at that point of disenfranchisement, I had a father who was a contractor. He sold siding and windows, had his own business. And so I got to see the world from a business owner's viewpoint from a young age. Interestingly enough, he made me work for him every summer. And that showed me 100% that I did not want to work with my hands and be in that realm. So I knew to break off that I could open my business, I could have a brick and mortar, and I could really focus on this holistic wellness realm.
Okay, that's interesting. Now, a number of people may not be aware of what bipolar is. There's a few TV programs I've watched in the last year or two that has people with this disorder. Can you just explain, just some context, what is bipolar? What's the extremes that can happen there?
Yeah. So when you think about bipolar disorder, the name kind of defines what it is. It's it's polar opposites essentially in the way you feel. There's no real in between. It's I'm really angry and on fire, or I have a lot of energy, or I'm sad and I want to stay in bed all day. And it's a chemical imbalance, and it's an imbalance in the brain. It's the imbalance in the inability to manage associated triggers. So you do need a combination of like medicine plus sort of a cognitive behavior therapy realm. And so when you think about this, the people who are suffering from that are the people who can't control it. So a lot of people say, "Oh, they're crazy. They get erratic," but that's not the issue. The issue is they have something internally that they don't know how to solve.
Right. That's useful, and especially as a young person, you must have learned some tremendous skills. The sort of emotional evaluation of the situation your mother was in. So that probably had some bearing on how you deal with other people and how you can perhaps interpret how other people are feeling, I guess.
Yeah, it really taught me to think about the way I'm communicating with people and to think about how they're communicating with me. And it taught me not to get angry when someone's angry. It taught me how to facilitate and diffuse situations when people are coming at you. It taught me how to talk to someone who is feeling sad and who isn't at the top of their game. And what it really moved me into, and I realized this concept in my adult life, was the concept of level 5 listening. So level 0 is me ignoring you. I'm just not paying attention, don't care. Level 2 is you're talking, but I'm on my phone. I'm like, Instagram. Yep. Yeah. Okay. Yep. And then you say a real question. I was like, oh, wait, hold on. What'd you say? So that's pretend listening. Level 3 is where most people sit. And so imagine this. And if you're in level 3 listening, you're having a conversation with someone and all you can think about is what you're going to say next. That's level 3. Level 4, I'm engaged in the conversation. I'm facilitating back and forth, but I'm still speaking from my own ego. I'm not really trying to understand your situation. And then level 5 is what I call empathetic listening. And that's where you're talking and I'm really, truly listening. I'm asking questions to develop an understanding of where you're coming from and how you sort of came to this thought process, where your model of the world started. And I facilitate the idea of being able to be empathetic to your situation, even if I don't agree with it. And that's the powerful system. And that's the powerful equation that you can design to have really powerful communication with other human beings.
All right. That's really useful, helping to explain that and the skills that you need to learn as a young person, how they have obviously held you in good stead as you've gone on in your career. Now, is that the reason why your first pillar is mental health? I guess that's the first question for me. And we're talking about behaviors here. What behaviors demonstrate areas for, should we say, specific attention? And what kind of signifies that there's a positive and a flourishing mental health condition is actually being achieved by the individual?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the reason that mental health became my first pillar was when we opened up our facility, I sat down and I worked with probably 2,000 to 4,000 people. And I realized along the way that if their mental health wasn't in order, if they didn't feel good in here, nothing else was going to work and the whole system was going to shatter. And so mental health became the first pillar. And what I realized was, though, it wasn't about thinking happy thoughts. It wasn't about positive affirmations. It wasn't even about positivity. And I think that's a huge misnomer in this world. We say, hey, think positive thoughts, be positive, say positive things, but that creates a real problem because you're ignoring the negative. You're ignoring the triggers. You're ignoring the fact that a problem does exist. And I think in order to be able to solve that, and what we do is we work to identify where these negative patterns come from. What is the history of these patterns? Where did they start? How do they keep manifesting along the way? Then we create the ability to recognize these patterns as triggers. And then we create the ability to have a conversation with ourselves internally when these triggers present themselves. And at that point, you can move from an emotional mindset to a logical mindset and work yourself through what's really happening.
That's quite interesting because people talk a lot about affirmations, as you say, positive thinking, and the sort of the suggestion, should I say, out there is that people, if they say this enough, then that will kind of sink in and it will suddenly start helping you out. But what you're implying is that just doing that on its own won't give you the results you're looking for.
Yeah, exactly. It's the same concept of medication. Medication might help put a Band-Aid on the problem, but it doesn't solve the underlying condition. So when we think about mental health, if all we do is think happy thoughts, we're pretending like the negative thoughts don't exist. And if you sit and live a life of pretending, you're eventually going to blow up and it's not going to help you 100%.
Yeah, it's more of a dream than a state, so to speak.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So moving on to the next one. Now, for me, entrepreneurs are sometimes considered as unsocial. Now, what I mean by that is they often hunker down, become super focused on their tasks and goals to the exclusion of probably all else or quite a lot of things. And that, I think, is, there's a fact that social media sets almost like an expectation that people should lock themselves away for 6 months and hustle and grind their way to success. So with that in mind, your second pillar being social health, how do you describe social health and why is it so important? And is it a key area for entrepreneurs particularly to work on bridging a gap?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think social health is the second most important pillar because the social dynamics you live in or you don't live in define essentially the way you feel. So it becomes second place to mental health because the social aspect, and think about it this way, if someone you're working with is constantly working 24/7 and killing themselves, you're going to do it too. And you're going to feel bad if you don't do it. If you have significant others or partners or friends or family who don't support you and tell you this is dumb, your idea is not going to make sense, I wouldn't do this, what if you fail? You're going to believe that. And you're going to have that inception brought into your mind. And so when we look at social health, we have to create a dynamic to where it allows us to push where we want to go. We have to move ourselves into a place where we can accept the fact that we are the captain of our own fate and the master of our soul, but we also have the ability to be influenced by other people. So when we look at social health, we create dynamics. We create destructive dynamics. Who's putting you in this environment to where you have to work 24/7? Who's putting you in this environment to where you start to question yourself? And then we look at positive environments. Who are the people or associations or situations where you feel good about where you're headed? Who are the people that make you think critically about what you're doing, but don't tell you it's never going to work, you suck, and all that? And then what are the neutral environments? What are the environments that you really haven't nurtured or poked into, but you could move them to destructive or positive? And so those are how we create the dynamics of social health, and the dynamic to where your social environment will allow you to excel. And I think you are the product of the 10 closest people that you communicate with, or even 5 closest people, because that's going to dictate the way you think. That's going to dictate your thought strategy, and that's going to dictate how you see yourself moving into the future.
Yeah. So if an entrepreneur, somebody's looking to become very successful, if they do almost cut themselves off from everything around them just with the focus of getting on, could that actually be damaging their success going forwards, because they do that to the exclusion of their own relationships and such?
Yeah, I think so. And the reason behind this is everybody thinks that they need to shut themselves out from the world to build and be successful. But then the problem that presents itself is, once you do become successful, once you do achieve that, you don't know how to get it back. You don't know how to go get back what you had that you gave up, because now you're in this place of loneliness. You're in this place of solitude. You're in this place to where you're the prisoner of your own success. And I think that's a big problem in the world of entrepreneurs, and why entrepreneurial rates of suicide and rates of depression can be fairly high, because we do that to ourselves. We put ourselves in this fortress of solitude, and we don't know how to get out of it.
I love that same fortress of solitude. I love those words. I remember that, highlight that, because I think you're absolutely right. Okay, now your third pillar is all about sleep. And this is kind of, for me, like a 3-part question. Now, one of the first parts is, how do you determine what is the optimal sleep for you as an individual? So that's can be quite challenging. I see some people sleep in 9-10 hours, particularly teenagers, should I say, as opposed to the more elderly people who tend to sleep less. And then the second part is, what happens if you get too little or too much sleep, and that doesn't blend with what's right for you? And the last dynamic is, how do you make sure that the sleep quality you get is sufficiently, good? Is it good quality sleep, or is it, you're drifting in and out of consciousness and unconsciousness?
Yeah, those are good questions. So I think the first thing we have to look at with sleep is, we don't want to pressure ourselves into, you need 8 hours a night, because 8 hours is a measurement of the average individual. And as we know, as humans, we're not the average individual. We are actually individuals. And so when we look at sleep and the way we want to measure how much or how little we should sleep, we want to take a sleep inventory. And what we do with a lot of people is we keep a sleep journal. So we keep track of, what did you do throughout the day? How many times did you eat? Did you exercise? Were you stressed out? Were you sitting in traffic for 7 hours? What are the things throughout your day that could have contributed to your sleep patterns that night? Then we look at, okay, how long did you sleep? Was it 7 hours? Was it 8 hours? How many times did you wake up throughout the night? When you woke up, on a scale of 1 to 10, did you feel rested, or did you feel like yawning and you were ready to just crash the second you woke up and you needed 35 cups of coffee? And so we take all of those and we create sort of a subjective identity of your sleep patterns and your capabilities of sleeping well. And then we can give that a score. So then we can say, okay, you ate 3 meals a day, you exercised that day, you drank this much water, you did all of this. And then when you went to sleep that night, you slept a solid 8 hours. You didn't wake up at all. Your restful sleep pattern was great. And now then the next day you woke up feeling refreshed and ready to go, in comparison to this other day where nothing like that happened. You only ate once, you were stressed out, you were hustling everywhere. And then you woke up 6 times throughout the night, and then you woke up tired. And so then we can say, okay, well, your sleep score before was a 10. Now your sleep score is a 4. And then over time, over the course of 30 days or so, we can create an average sleep score. And then our goal in that environment is to consistently push that sleep score up until we get to a place to where you've created the individualized aspect of your sleep plan and what your sleep pattern should be.
Now, that's really interesting. So that's quite a scientific approach to get that assessment. And are we talking about data over days or weeks? Is it a 30-day kind of data login all the time, or how does that work?
Yeah, typically what I'll do is we'll have people fill out a little sleep log once a day that takes less than 2 minutes, so it doesn't get too complicated and make their life challenging.
Yeah.
And what I do is if we have a client working with us, I like to keep a sleep log for as long as they work with us. So that way, and I think the first 30 days are critical because then I can identify, okay, what's going on. And for me personally, because I've seen so many people, I can usually identify what's going on in the first couple of weeks. Usually the first 2 weeks, we have enough data to make an inference as to what we should do moving forward. And so after 30 days, we have some concrete ideas. It doesn't seem like a long time frame, but it really gives me a good bird's eye view of your sleep, your patterns, your lifestyle, et cetera. And then if I have a client who sticks with us for a year, now I have a massive amount of data on this human being. I mean, you think about gold standard tests and studies, they go for years and years and years. So the longer I can keep data with a client, the more likely it is they have a consistent and continuous personalized plan to make sure their sleep falls on track and goes where it needs to be. And then they can self-regulate. Hey, Chandler, I've been a 10 for the last 3 months, but I noticed this month I dropped down to a 7. And I noticed I did this and this and that. So what I'm going to do is I just gave them the keys to their own car.
That's really fascinating there. Trying to think how people can have the commitment to keep recording that data and assessing it. Are there you've got so much data there. I'm just intrigued now. Are there certain patterns that you see that are particularly destructive? And are there certain ones that are particularly helpful and positive?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the patterns that I find that are particularly destructive are not eating enough. People who tend to skip meals and don't eat enough tend to be the people who have issues sleeping. The next pattern I see is people who don't have sort of a bedtime routine and they're staying up late and not kind of prepping themselves. They tend to have poor sleep patterns. And the next thing that I find that's particularly interesting is the way someone wakes up and initially works out typically impacts the evening sleep patterns. And so if we can work out earlier or exercise earlier, you tend to have more restful and better sleep. And then on top of that, what I find is if we put ourselves in a place where we can be consistent with what we're eating, that puts us in a place to sleep well as well. So when you think about it, it may sound simplistic, but it really does come down to how much you're moving throughout the day, what you're eating throughout the day, and then ultimately what your stress levels are. And this is the final thing that really impacts sleep at a significant level. If you're level 10 stressed every day, you're going to stay up all night and toss and turn. It's going to have a significant impact in your sleep, maybe the most important impact in your sleep. So that's why we solve mental health first, because we need that taken care of and tackled before we can start thinking about the other things.
Right. Okay. That makes absolute sense. So people who can't deal with stress from a mental perspective, you will help them to how to package up and deal with those stressors and, let's say, calm them down a little bit, which will impact on the sleep, which will then impact on their stress levels again because they're not so tired, I guess.
Exactly. And so we have this concept, everything is everything. So your mental health becomes your sleep patterns. Your sleep patterns become your nutritional patterns. Your nutritional patterns become your fitness. All of these become your habits.
Brilliant. Now, this is making a lot more clarity now. So it's great we're talking through this. The next one you mentioned, the fourth pillar, is wealth. Now, wealth can be considered in a number of different ways. It could be your fiscal wealth, you mentioned. It could be, your happiness wealth, that sort of quotient, or perhaps, how you're perceived or the standing in your community, perhaps. What do you mean by wealth in this context? And does it matter?
Yeah. So in this context, because we're tackling sort of the emotional stuff in the mental health side of things and the social health side of things, when we tackle wealth, we're talking about financial wealth. And the reason that this became a pillar, and this was the most recent addition, because as I was working with people, I noticed that finances tend to be one of the most problematic and stressful situations, which in turn will impact sleep and which in turn will impact how you feel about yourself moving forward, especially in the entrepreneurial world where people with businesses can sometimes see fluctuations in their income, and their ability to survive often depends on debt load. So when we look at the wealth pillar, it's identifying lifestyle, it's identifying wealth, it's identifying investments, it's identifying long-term. Like, are you putting yourself in a position to where you're living paycheck to paycheck, stacking stuff on credit cards and perpetuating the cycle? Have you put yourself in a position to where you're not going to be able to retire at the end of your career if you can't sell your business? And this is important for business owners and entrepreneurs because most of them, less than 1%, will be able to sell their business. The rest are going to be stuck at the end of the day when they can't sell and they want to retire. So we have to set people up in a way to where they're comfortable and okay should their business not be able to be sold. And so I think that's why wealth becomes so important and so critical in this aspect, because financial management or poor financial management becomes one of the most critical and contributing factors to the inability of people to feel and be successful.
Yeah, totally understand. That's really good. Now, the next one I've got particular interest in, again, is nutrition. Because I'm assuming now, pretend we're an engine. If you put poor fuel into an engine, you'll get some pretty poor results. You'll cough and splutter and it won't, obviously get the full power out. So I'm assuming that, you believe that the fuel you put in can seriously impact both the physical body and the mental mind. And there's a couple of people I tend to follow and listen to. And Jim Quick, for example, is one of those who talks about the different types of foods you should eat that help your brain power, for example. There's another guy I had on my podcast called Nate Palmer, who talks about how fuel in your body gives you some advantages. Now, from a nutrition aspect, it sounds like you've got a similar beliefs, so what nutrition things, what thoughts have you got behind nutrition that can really help boost people on a consistent basis?
Yeah, my concept on nutrition is we need to make something plausible and work for someone's specific lifestyle. So when we look at nutrition and we work with people, we devise and design an individualized and custom plan that's going to work for them and their lifestyle. And I think that's important because a lot of people move into these ideas of diets, but diets aren't sustainable. Nobody can do keto forever. Nobody wants to do keto forever. Some people want to be a vegan, but most people try to be a vegan and then don't do it anymore because it's hard. And so when we look at nutrition, we need to create a balanced platform of foods that we can eat and create consistency in, but also variety for the individual to match their lifestyle and to allow them to have that consistency moving forward. And so when I think about good nutrition for me, it's the concept of you have some sort of meat with your food. You have some sort of veggies that you consume on a regular basis. We can consume fruits. We can consume fats because fats are flavorful and exciting. And we just balance these out in proportions that are going to work for the individual person. So if some person works better on a little more fats, that's okay. If some person works better on a little more carbohydrates, that's okay too. If someone wants to lose weight and we need to adjust the balance to create the weight loss and then move it back to be sustainable, that's okay too. And so when we look at nutrition, we use sort of a scientific identification process to where we can say, okay, here's what the balance you needs to be from your inventory we took. Here's how it should look based on the foods you like, the foods you don't like, how much time you have available to cook, how good you are at cooking. And here's how it'll match your lifestyle specifically. And then people can take that, they can do it, and they can say, wow, Chandler, I didn't know I didn't have to eat keto. I didn't know that I didn't have to avoid a carb for the rest of my life. I didn't know it didn't have to be miserable. I didn't know I could still eat tacos. And then they're okay to do this moving forward, and they're okay to be consistent. And then that consistency creates success. That success helps their brain function. It helps them be creative. It helps them sleep. And it puts them in a position to where ultimately their fuel has allowed their body to become a high performance machine.
Yeah, I guess the ability to get fast food all the time, relatively cheaply, shall we say, that's one of I would say, has a major impact on your ability to function properly. Would you say that's an important thing to people to recognize out there? It's not the pizzas, not the burgers that are doing you good physically and mentally.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the biggest problems that people run into is they say, I don't have enough time, so I'll go get fast food. I'll go get a pizza. And when we look at people's schedule and their lifestyle, what they believe is they need to go cook these like elaborate organic meals and just get all this stuff that they don't want to do and that like completely alters their lifestyle. So they just get a pizza. And that's why when we look at this environment, we need to create a plan that matches their lifestyle. So, hey, it's not the fact that you don't have enough time. It's that you're focusing on the wrong aspects. You believe that you need to do all this junk in order to make this thing work that the weight loss industry is throwing at you, because it is $1 billion industry and they do want you to keep doing diets and they do enjoy taking your money. So for us, what we want to look at is, okay, well, you don't have enough time to cook this elaborate meal, but you do have enough time to cook this little 5-minute thing that we've already kind of set up and designed for you. So now they come home and they're like, okay, I don't need the pizza because I do have things at home. And I know I can cook that because I'm aware that it only takes about 5 minutes. And when we look at these nutritional patterns for people, we break it down to how many minutes is it going to take you to cook this? And we look at, okay, lunch, breakfast, lunch, dinner. What's your breakfast look like? Well, I'm right out the door. I have 3 minutes to prep everything. So we give them something they can essentially make instantly. Lunch, I don't have a microwave. I'm at work. We give them something that doesn't require a microwave and takes seconds to prepare. Dinner, I have 15 minutes. We give them something that takes exactly 15 minutes to prepare and set up. So that way they move into this mindset of, I don't eat fast food anymore. I don't have to have this elaborate organic chicken thing with rosemary on it and all this stuff that I don't want to cook at home that takes 3 hours. I can get it done relatively quick. And sometimes if they need to, cheaply.
Yeah, it's quite interesting that time is a major factor here for, it appears like most people. You're giving people, as you say, very easy to work with ideas and recipes. Perhaps you're helping the structure, the organization of how they go about and plan their meals. So it doesn't become a burden anymore. It becomes an easy activity that becomes like a daily easy thing to do. I don't have to worry about it. I've got it planned and organized. And I guess, I don't know if this is right, after a period of time, do those people therefore become so familiar with it and comfortable with it, they actually then go on to become a little bit more elaborate. So they start to enjoy cooking and eating in a different way.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And one of our tenets is, I want you to be able to do this on your own. I tell people like, look, at most personal trainers, most health programs, most weight loss systems, they want you to pay them for the rest of your life. That's called stick rate. For me, I want you to go off and do this on your own. I want you to say, Chandler, you're a cool dude. I like you, but peace out. I don't need you anymore. I've got this. And so that's what we build in most of our programs and patterns. And that's why mental health and social health and sleep start first, because we create those micro habits that become installed. Then once we install those micro habits in nutrition, people all of a sudden start saying, I altered this a little bit and it worked. I adjusted this and it made sense. I tried this and it worked. And my patterns and nothing changed. And so then I can say, wow, that's really cool, because now you're learning to be self-sufficient. And that's what we need. We need to move away from an environment to where we're so focused and we need all these health programs and all that, and move into an environment where we teach self-sufficiency.
Right. Fantastic. Now, the one I'm quite interested in, your sixth pillar, is about fitness. Now, would I be right in saying that you mean by fitness, it's not just physical fitness, but mental fitness? And if so, how do you address both of those aspects?
Yeah, that's a good question. So when we look at the mental fitness aspect, that starts when we start looking at mental health. That moves deeper when we start looking at social health. It moves even deeper when we start looking at sleep. So you're compounding the patterns of your mental wellness or your mental fitness through every single aspect that we go through. Once we get to nutrition, now you're in a place to where you're not releasing hormones. They're going to tell you to eat more and gain weight. And now you move into the fitness aspect, and all of a sudden you start working out. And that's the final key to unlocking the ultimate mental wellness environment, because when you exercise, you release hormones and endorphins that make you feel better about yourself and want to continue moving forward and ultimately happy. And so that all of a sudden becomes the final encompassing piece that puts that last little puzzle piece in that makes you ultimately mentally well. And then when we look at the physical side of things, my concept on fitness and exercise isn't necessarily about weight loss. It's not about putting someone in the gym and saying, hey, run on the treadmill for an hour. That's miserable. I can tell you, I get on the treadmill for 7 seconds and I'm like, yeah, I'd rather die. So I want to put people into an environment to where fitness becomes a game. Hey, you want to go for a hike? That's your fitness. You want to swim? That's your fitness. You want to do Brazilian jiu-jitsu? That's your fitness. Whatever it is that makes you happy, let's get you doing that. And the most important aspect for me in fitness is bone density, because if we can build bone density by consistently exercising and consistently putting ourselves in that place to where we have those habits established doing it, you're going to increase your longevity of life, because bone density tends to be one of the single biggest predicting factors for longevity of life.
Okay, that's some quite interesting aspects there. Just touch on the mental side. That there's a lot of phone apps, should we say, that profess to help you and your brain become a little bit more agile, should we say. Now, do you suggest factoring in some of these apps out there that help you solve puzzles and do things like that? Does that, in your opinion, have a really positive impact on your mental fitness?
Yeah, that's a good question. And my first thing behind this is If you're doing it because you think you need to do it and you don't enjoy it and it's a chore, don't do it. Because you're going to put yourself in this environment where you have 844 different apps and you don't use any of them and you just hate looking at it. So number one, if you don't like it, don't do it. Number two, though, if you do enjoy puzzles and you do enjoy that creativity aspect that kind of forces you to think, then I think it does help quite a bit because it forces you to start analyzing. It forces your brain to start connecting the dots, start moving things around. And I think about the aspect of school back in the day, or organic chemistry, one of the most feared and hated classes anyone has ever gone through. I still have PTSD and nightmares about it, but thinking about how to move molecules and move organic things and adjust compounds and just visualizing that 3D aspect puts you into this like mindset to where you really have to critically think and analyze, and you have to be comfortable like being wrong and adjusting and not getting it right and then moving it and getting it right. So I do think that enhances your ability to be mentally well. And so that doesn't have to be doing puzzles and apps though. Interestingly enough, you can go out, like I do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and it's a chess game. It's a mental chess game. The whole time you're just thinking about how you can move around another human being who's thinking about how they can move around you. So if you think about that, I've done the exact same thing in a physical environment. When you think about going hiking, you're now in an environment where your brain and your body's consistently and constantly analyzing what's going on around you. Are you going to step on that rock? What's that noise over there? Where's that eagle? I smell this thing. So you don't necessarily just need an app. You just need to put yourself in an environment that you're not necessarily consistently used to, because then you put yourself in a consistent and constant analysis phase.
Right. That's fascinating. Now, we've got one more habit to touch on, but before we go there, I guess a lot of people are going to be quite intrigued to hear what other things that you can help them with. Where do they go to find out about, your website, your social media profile? What's the best place to learn more from you?
Yeah, a couple great places. If you want to learn about the 6 pillars of wellness system, we do have a free video available. It's the psychotherapeutic system for weight loss without diets, pills, or restriction. You just go to 6pillars.stoneagefuel.com. That's SIXPILLARS.stoneagefuel, STONEAGEFUEL.com. So that'll give you that free video. You can check it out. If you want to connect with me personally and see my lifestyle and habits, go to Instagram.com/Chandler_SAF. The picture is myself in a yellow water slide with my daughter. There's all kinds of fun stuff on there. And if you really want to understand the wealth aspect and the communications aspect, then connect with me on YouTube, just youtube.com/Chandler Walker SAF. Chandler like from Friends, Walker like the Texas Ranger, and then SAF like Stone Age Fuel.
Okay. So just to clarify then, because people are saying, hold on, we've been talking about 7 pillars and we're just about to go in the 7th. You mentioned that on your website and such, it talks about 6. Is that because the new one has only been recently added?
Yeah. So the new one, Wealth, is one of the most recent additions within the past probably 18 months. And so we're updating everything and getting more of our marketing and outset materials to reflect the new 7th pillar. We've been kind of micro installing it for a few years now with different subsets of clients. And now we're at a point to where it's fairly scientific and it's a great process and it's in order.
Brilliant. Just so we can help clarify what's happening there. So now the 7th pillar I've got is habits. Now you can cover a wealth of activities. So I think it's worth you diving a little bit deeper into here, because the structure of one's day, we're talking about a lot of structure and planning and organization about the previous 6 pillars. What does the habit side encompass, and why is it so important to have a good repeating habit?
Yeah, good question. So the interesting thing about habits is as you're going through all of our 6 pillars, our previous 6 pillars, you're installing micro habits every step of the way. We're installing micro habits with mental health. And every week we install a very small piece of the pillars that's a micro habit. So a little bit of a piece of mental health, a little social health, little sleep, little nutrition, little fitness. And ultimately all of these come together to create long-standing patterns of behavior. And these are called habits. And when you think about the way human beings operate, we need to install micro patterns of behavior that we can learn to consistently do and adopt, because those become long-term patterns of behavior that we do unconsciously. And so the entire goal of the habits curriculum is to create what we call unconscious competence. And unconscious competence it's like breathing. When I breathe, I don't have to think about it. I just breathe. And that's what I want to do. I want to create a system to where I've installed and created unconscious competence across the board. So that way you become the lifestyle that you're living and you don't have to think about it. It's not hard. It's not miserable. And it just happens sort of like magically at the end of the day.
Right. That's really useful, because the things we haven't mentioned, I guess, will come into some of the other habits like meditation. It's talked about a lot. People starting the day with meditating and perhaps finishing in meditating. We touched on affirmations as having a little piece of the puzzle. We've mentioned journaling, and I originally started today, and there's a lot of people who talk about the importance of journaling as well. And one of the things we haven't mentioned perhaps is family and dealing with family and interacting. I guess that falls into the social side. Would you say all those things are part of your program? Are there any things that you particularly want to draw out that I've missed?
Yeah, good question. So when we think about the patterns of like meditation and breathing, we help people design what a morning routine looks like. And for me, it's based on simplicity. I don't want someone to wake up and have to do 700 things that are stressful. So it's like, wake up. What do you want to do first? Do you just want to sit in your back porch and drink coffee and stare at the sun? Perfect. You're getting your vitamin D. You're setting yourself up for success. Do you want to wake up and meditate? Is that something interesting to you? Yeah. Okay. Let's try it. Okay. That's not consistent. Okay. Go back to drinking coffee in the sun, because we need to make sure what we install is going to work long term. And while meditation is helpful and does work well, it's not going to work well for everybody. And if they hate doing it and they dread doing it, they're not going to continue doing it. So we need to be conscious and aware of that. Then when we think about journaling as part of our mental health curriculum, we journal every week. We journal every step of the way. We journal about our thoughts. We journal about negative triggers. We journal about what's coming up, what's manifesting. So that way we can learn to think about it on the fly. And this is part of unconscious competence. If I journal about it, the good and the bad and everything in between, I can now logically start to critically analyze myself in the moment and as I'm moving forward in my life.
Right. There's an awful lot to take in here, but I can see there's a very clear structure that you've developed. Is there any examples of it? Not going obviously into individuals where you say people have transformed from when they first started your program, and the outcome of being on your program, and I assume staying on your program, has made such a shift. It's worth mentioning. Have you got anything you could share on an example person?
Yeah, for sure. I had one girl that comes to mind all the time. She came into the program because she wanted to lose weight. And she worked for a company. She was essentially like the third person in line of managing everything, which ultimately made her the person managing everything. And so what she found was she was working a lot 24/7. She didn't have time to do anything for herself. But what was even more interesting was about 3 weeks into the program, she said, Chandler, I just recognized that I don't even think I want to lose weight. I think that's been the scapegoat, because that's been the thing that I think that society's told me I need to do, that people have told me I need to do, that I feel like I need to do. And she said, I've actually learned that it's okay to not take my workload home. I've learned that it's okay to actually breathe. I've learned that it's okay to be myself. I've learned that it's okay to not want all of this work 24/7. I've learned that it's okay to say no to it. And so I think that was pretty impactful and powerful, because a lot of people come into this game and think they just need to lose weight, but they're not empowered enough or aware enough to say, maybe that's not really the goal. Maybe that's not what I want. And more importantly, in my opinion, nobody really does want to lose weight. That's the superficial idea of what they believe that society wants for them. When we uncover the real reasons, it's usually some sort of socioeconomic factor. It's an issue of self-confidence. It's an issue of self-worth. It's an issue of overwork. There's so many different underlying aspects that come into play here. And we've had multiple clients come to us with the idea of weight loss or with the idea of removing burnout. But ultimately, we have to get past these issues of self-confidence, self-awareness, and ultimately understand who they really are and where they want to be.
That's a really good way to finish today, to understand from a person's perspective how they've shifted in their way of thinking, particularly. And that, I guess, means they're a much happier person and probably more productive a person as a result of doing so.
Yeah, exactly. And all of a sudden they realize that work's always going to be there for them. All of a sudden they realize that by reducing that aspect of their life, they inadvertently start losing weight. They inadvertently start feeling good about themselves. They inadvertently can spend time with their family. And ultimately they stop feeling bad about everything they're doing and start finally, for the first time, usually in their lives, they look in the mirror and they're happy with who they see on the other side.
Yeah, and it's really good to mention, I think, that this is a compounding effect. So the more people add these little layers you mentioned earlier on, this is a little bit like interest in the bank. You keep compounding and making more of an investment in yourself as time goes on.
Yeah, absolutely. And the compounding aspect of this creates these long-standing habits that create that awareness and that unconscious competence to where you do it without thinking. And the very nature of compounding. I mean, look at finances. Compounding interest is one of the wonders of the world. It's the most incredible thing. If you can create that compounding impact, if you create that compounding impact in your life, it's the same thing. It's like personal hockey stick like growth, where all of a sudden you feel like you're on top of the world. You feel like you're doing everything right. You feel like you're in this great position. And it really puts you in a place to where you feel like you've set yourself a fire underneath yourself, to where you can finally pursue and be exactly who you want to be and where you want to be.
That's brilliant. Well, again, thank you very much for what you've shared today. There's an awful lot to take in. I think people are going to have to sit back and take some notes and reflect quite a bit on all that you said today. And what I can say is just thank you for sharing that with us and for giving me the time that you've done today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Hopefully we helped everybody out. And hopefully the 7 pillars of wellness can help you take yourself from where you are now to living that dream.
Thanks, Chandler.
Thank you.
So there's another Real Life Buyer podcast. I do hope you enjoyed it and it's given you some ideas and inspiration for greater action and achievement. If you are a purchasing or a supply chain professional, business owner or director, come and join my Facebook group, the Purchasing and Supply Chain Community Hub, a safe place to engage with like-minded, friendly people. See you soon. Bye.